Hello. September is National Recovery Month, and during this time, the field honors recovery practices, celebrates people in recovery, acknowledges service providers, the medical community, the court system, law enforcement, family members, peers, and everyone that makes recovery attainable. It's important that we acknowledge different types of recovery pathways because everyone's experience with addiction is different. I'd like to thank OASAS for organizing this event on the different pathways to recovery. My name is Sky Davis, and I work at the New York State Unified Court System Office for Justice Initiatives. I am excited to share one pathway, treatment courts. Treatment courts in New York State have saved many lives from addiction. By the end of my talk, I hope to provide you with better awareness about these courts that focus on addressing the underlying issues that bring people into the criminal justice system. Together, we can continue to help people that get arrested or parents that have pending child welfare cases that need addressing the issues that brought them into the court system. Treatment courts were considered radical and revolutionary when they were developed over 26 years ago. During a time when there was a national war on drugs and many New York's draconian Rockefeller drug laws resulted in the sentencing of mainly people of color to life in prison. Back then, the concept of helping people change their behavior through judicial interaction, incentives, and therapeutic sanctions in a holistic approach with treatment and supportive services, it was viewed as being soft on crime. During this time, communities wanted to provide a punitive response to the disease of addiction. The Honorable John Schwartz, a judge in Rochester, New York, saw a need to help people that were cycling in and out of his courtroom and were ravaged by addiction. He saw that this cycle was neither improving public safety and it wasn't reducing recidivism, and he was right. Since 1995, the New York State Unified Court System's Office for Justice Initiatives has worked with courts around the state to plan, implement, train, and support hundreds of treatment courts. With guidance from our office, these courts ensure that all New Yorkers have access to appropriate and meaningful justice. We are always thinking of innovative ways that the court system can improve the needs of individuals that come to the courts with issues of substance use, mental illness, and trauma. Today, we have 124 treatment courts serving all 62 counties in New York. On an average, we see about 7,000 participants per year, and since 1995, we have served over 120,000 people. Treatment courts provide judicial supervision, referrals to appropriate clinical interventions, and case management. But the court system does not do this work alone. We work with a dedicated group of people that guide justice-involved individuals from the road of addiction towards recovery. They all have a common belief that if you transform families and change communities, it is possible to reduce crime. These dedicated professionals include judges, court staff, prosecutors, defense attorneys, probation officers, law enforcement, social workers, treatment providers, service providers, peers, and others. Treatment courts vary from county to county because each county is different in terms of geography, transportation, clinical services, and resources. But all the courts follow one model. For an individual to participate in a treatment court, the person must be involved in the family court or the criminal court system. To be considered for treatment court, for example, in criminal court, the prosecutor and the defense attorney will review the underlying case and the criminal record to determine if the individual is eligible for participation. However, each person must also undergo a clinical assessment. During the assessment, we learn about the individual's risks and needs and determine if there are appropriate resources to help the individual. The individual consults with their defense attorney regarding a contract or a plea agreement in lieu of incarceration or having their cases prosecuted. The plea agreement is like a legal promise. that the individual will follow the rules of the program, the court mandate, and any other stipulations that are outlined in advance. Most courts will reduce or dismiss the charges upon completion of the court mandate. Individuals that choose to participate in treatment courts are referred as participants. Participants are referred to appropriate service providers for treatment, and the court relies on the service providers in the community to provide culturally appropriate, evidence-based treatment and supports. And the modalities or treatment settings can range from medication-assisted treatment, outpatient treatment, inpatient treatment, and telehealth services. The court and the treatment providers remain in contact to exchange information regarding participation. Participants are required to report to court on a frequent basis to meet with the judge and/or the case management staff. Prior to the court appearance, the judge is provided with status information on how each participant is doing. Judges receive input from the treatment agency, the attorneys, anyone involved in the case. The judge considers all of the input regarding each participant's progress and then responds to their positive efforts, as well as any non-compliant behavior. Most treatment courts have phases, which allows participants to undergo a structure that recognizes benchmarks from orientation through stabilization, support, all the way up to the completion or graduation. The phases are like a roadmap that lead to a program completion, and they are based on clinical needs and prognostic risk factors. The completion of each phase allows participants to measure things like personal growth and healthy decision-making. Since everyone's path towards addiction is different, the courts do not have a single approach for all. We recognize that all participants will move through the phases differently, and the courts work with the treatment providers to adjust treatment levels as needed. All participants are provided with a handbook that outlines the process. Some participants observe court in advance of their participation agreement to see how the court operates before committing to the program. We recognize that being in a court setting can be confusing and daunting. Some courts work with peers that have shared experiences, meaning they have lived through addiction and have engaged in their own recovery. Peers help participants minimize the fears. They walk with the participants through the court process, and they provide a supportive setting throughout the participants' recovery. Many peers maintain a relationship with participants far past treatment court, and some participants decide to become peers when they become alumni. Peers do not give legal advice, and they do not give clinical advice. They support and they encourage, and the assistance that they provide for the court and throughout the participants' recovery is immeasurable. The judge and the team of professionals undergo training to understand that addiction is a chronic disease, and with any chronic disease such as diabetes or hypertension, relapses occur. These professionals are also trained to understand the different treatment modalities, how to use incentives and sanctions to improve participants' behavior. They are also trained on national best practices of treatment courts and other important topics, such as co-occurring substance use and mental health disorders, trauma-informed care, understanding certain populations, such as veterans, LGBTQ, and others. On the topic of training, I did want to mention to family members that during these unprecedented times, there has been an increase in drug and alcohol use due to stress, social isolation, social disruption, uncertainty, illness, and death. If you reside with an opioid user, or if you want to learn how to reserve an opioid overdose in your home or community, equip yourself with naloxone. It is a medication that reverses an opioid overdose. Many places like health departments to public libraries provide free training, either virtual or in person. The court system has trained court officers and court staff on how to use naloxone. Treatment providers educate participants on how to use naloxone. So if your loved one had diabetes, you would provide insulin. If your loved one is addicted to heroin or other opioids, you should have naloxone ready to prevent an overdose. While treatment courts in New York State save many lives, and it is just one of the many pathways towards recovery, there are multiple paths for different people. Even the definition of recovery has different meanings for different people. Substance use disorders are different, and so is recovery. And as I described earlier, treatment court is one path, but it is not for everyone. I have met many people who were not ready for the rigorous structure of a treatment court, and they were unable to complete the program. But I have also run into people that many years later, when they were ready to work on their own recovery, they used a lot of the tools that they learned in treatment court and incorporated them into their personal recovery. I have been working in the field of substance use and criminal justice for over 25 years. I have seen a lot of heartbreaking cases involving parents who, because of their struggles with addiction and mental illness, abused or neglected their children and were at risk of losing their parental rights. I've seen young people charged with serious felonies, and sadly, because of the pandemic, we have been seeing more drug overdoses that have resulted in deaths. I'd like to end with the impact of what happens when a participant successfully completes treatment court. Some treatment courts hold a graduation or a recognition ceremony where friends and family gather and celebrate in the person's success. During the graduation, participants share their stories. They talk about the long, dark, and different roads that they traveled. They also share about their personal growth and success of owning a business, a home, receiving promotions at work, or graduating from college. They don't realize it, but the greatest weapon that they have against the stigma associated with addiction and mental illness is their story. When they share their stories of struggle and healing, they prove that recovery is achievable, that it is okay to get help. And through their stories, they give others hope. They educate people about addiction and mental illness, and they decrease stigma and shame. At the end of their stories, the graduates thank their family members for their support and constant encouragement. And it is this encouragement that they believe kept them focused and moving forward. Thank you so much for allowing me the opportunity to talk about one of the many pathways to recovery. I hope that I have provided you with a better understanding of how treatment courts work for individuals in the criminal justice system with unaddressed and frequently undiagnosed alcohol use disorders, mental illness, and complex histories of trauma.